What is the missile from the sky which still baffles the Rockingham County Sheriff? What was it that hammered a hole in this house in Hampshire? Can it really be that living fish can rain from the sky?
A fishy story at Hughenden Airport in Queensland today. A tropical downpour up there was apparently accompanied by hundreds of live fish which literally rained out of the sky. Locals quickly spotted that the slippery little customers were tasty freshwater perch, and soon the fish weren't flying but frying. Eyewitnesses, some of them teetotal at that, swore that the fish came from the clouds, though how they got there is anyone's guess.
Mysteries from the files of Arthur C. Clarke, author of 2001 and inventor of the communication satellite. Now in retreat in Sri Lanka after a lifetime of science, space and writing, he ponders the riddles of this and other worlds.
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this because many of you simply won't believe me, but a most extraordinary thing happened right here in my local swimming club in Colombo, where every day I play table tennis with my partner here, Sarath. And quite recently, he told me an extraordinary thing. Sarath, tell me what it was happened that day.
That day I saw some 4 or 5.
4 or 5 fish?
Fish. Under this Christmas tree here.
Under this tree?
Yeah.
And were they lying on the ground?
Yeah.
What did you feel when you saw them? What do you think?
I thought they'd come from the rainbow.
I see. You thought the fish might have fallen from the rainbow. Well, it's curious. I have known about this kind of thing for 40 years, but I never dreamt that it would have happened right on my doorstep. I mean, what an extraordinary thing, fish falling from the sky.
It would be about 6:15 in the evening, a summer's evening.
During World War II, Yorkshireman Joe Alpin was stationed with the Artists' Rifles at Alton Towers in Staffordshire. That particular evening, he was driving in the deer park in an army truck.
The sky suddenly darkened, very, very dark indeed, like a thunderstorm. And then the frogs came, millions of them, raining out of the sky. Millions upon millions of frogs, about a ½ inch long. They fell all over us, all over the grass, all over the cars, down the neck of our tunics, on our feet, hands everywhere. And they were very minute things, you know, no bigger than a dice or a small cube of sugar, little tiny things. And it wasn't possible to walk on them at all. We couldn't do anything. When the vehicles came to a standstill, we seemed to be, well, we all had one idea. We just switched the ignition off and waited for them to stop coming down. And it rained frogs for at least an hour and a quarter.
Mrs. Sylvia Moday also experienced an aerial avalanche. On June the 12th, 1954, she took her children to Platt's Meadow in Sutton Coldfield. The local paper reported the naval display they had gone to see, but missed some real news.
It was a horrible day. Typical summer's day, actually, in Britain. It was raining all the time, but this was a very heavy shower. We'd actually been and bought my little daughter a little red umbrella, and we heard something thudding against the umbrella. And when we looked, to our amazement, it was a shower of frogs. And they still were coming from the skies. There were hundreds of them. Our umbrella was covered, all our shoulders were covered. And as we looked up, we could see them coming down like snowflakes. And all at once, when we looked down, the ground was absolutely covered with them, hundreds of them. Over an area of about 50 square yards, I should think.
My interest in mysteries was first triggered when I read stories of frogs falling from the sky. These had been collected in the early part of this century by a remarkable American named Charles Fort, who spent much of his life in dusty libraries digging up old newspaper clippings. He wrote these up in a series of remarkable and often witty books with intriguing titles like Lo and the Book of the Damned. Besides frogs, Charles Fort recorded falls of fish, grain, cinders, ants, worms, and most remarkable of all, a turtle encased in ice, and even an alligator, which fell on American towns in the 1890s. Amazingly, such falls are not uncommon. Charles Fort mentions one which occurred right here in Cinnamon Gardens, again not more than half a mile from my house in Colombo. It's reported by Sir James Emerson Tennant, who wrote an important natural history of Ceylon. He was riding through here when he saw a heavy rainstorm. When he reached the spot, he discovered that the ground was covered with little fish wriggling around. Now, this is at least a mile from the sea, and there are no lakes or ponds or rivers around. Sri Lanka is by no means the only place where fish have been recorded falling from a clear sky.
In 1948, Mr. Ian Patey, a former British amateur golf champion, had just started to play around at the Barton-on-Sea Golf Club on the cliff tops near Bournemouth.
I was playing a mixed match with my wife about 6 o'clock on a June evening, and we were coming down this second fairway, and she was about to play a second shot from just over there. And just before she hit it, a fish fell down on the ground in front of us, and then we looked up in the sky, and suddenly there were hundreds of fishes falling in an area of about 100 yards. They were alive. They were about that size. They were larger than whitebait and possibly smaller than a sardine. My reaction was one of complete surprise. After all, there wasn't a cloud in the sky. You didn't suspect anything could fall out of the sky like that. There was no prior sort of evidence that anything was going to happen, like a thunderstorm.
It was a humid October morning in 1947 when it rained fish in Marksville.
As I left the house to go to school that morning, I went through the back of the house, and as I got near the garage, I heard something fall on the tin roof of the garage, and simultaneously something hit me on my head and on my shoulders, and I looked down, there were fish.
I was in bed, not feeling good, and I didn't get up early, but my maid came and early, and she was out in the yard. I was still in bed. And she ran in, excited like everything, and she's a black maid, but that day she was white of excitement. And she came and she told me, she said, Miss Lola, she said, it's raining fishes. It's raining fishes.
When we heard all this noise, you know, when the fish fell on the roof, this tin roof, my maid, whose name was Viola, ran outside with me, and she was so upset, and she kept saying, Lord, Lord. She said, I think it must be the end of the world.
I was coming up this road, I was coming north, I was just about a block away, when all of a sudden a fish fell right to my right hand, the left-hand side of the car. I saw the fish fall out of the sky. I kept driving, I was very amazed, and when I got here, at this location here, the yard was just absolutely covered with fish. And I was amazed. I stopped, and just about that time, other people started getting here, and everybody was just amazed at the whole thing and just couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe that the fish had just dropped out of the sky.
I told Daddy that these fish had fallen on me, and he was a little incredulous, I guess, and didn't believe me. And finally I said, well, let's go outside and I'll show them to you. So we went on back outside, and I showed Daddy And of course, I wanted my father to explain all things to me, and as most 14-year-olds would, and he couldn't.
This is fascinating, and one's first guess is that a whirlwind must have taken them up before dropping them in front of the astonished eyewitnesses. I'm sure this accounts for some falls of fish and frogs, but there are problems with the whirlwind theory. Why is it always one kind of fish? Why are there no weeds or other objects? Why are deep water fish sometimes involved? Moreover, what comes down must have gone up. Why are there no reports of the liftoff? Similar questions are raised by another surprisingly common phenomenon. Blocks of ice, often very large blocks, falling from a clear sky.
It was on this quiet council estate at Lyndhurst in Hampshire that one such potentially lethal block descended on a hot summer's day in 1980. Motor mechanic Ed Fox was called home from work to find huge lumps of ice in his bedroom. Just a few feet away, when the ice fell, was next-door neighbour Mrs. Megan Murray.
First of all, I heard a whooshing sound, rather like you hear when a rocket goes off. And then almost on top of that, there was a loud explosion, as if something had blown up. It's one of these unexplained happenings, I should think. I really don't know where it came from. As I was saying, a hot summer's day, more or less, you wouldn't expect to suddenly find large lumps of ice coming out of the sky.
In America, beyond the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, another ice bomb has for some years been an unsolved case on the files of the Rockingham County Sheriff's Department. The scene of the incident is the home of Wilbert W. Cullers and his family at Timberville in the Shenandoah Valley.
Me and my son and his wife, it is now, his girlfriend at that time, were sitting here watching television, the $6 million man to be exact. And the $6 million man had just got up on the roof of a big building and reached over and grabbed a vent or a smokestack or something and give it a yank. And just as he yanked, it sounded like the ceiling all fell in on my house.
We looked up the ceiling and we saw insulation and ice falling down on the floor, which flew all over us.
Well, if it would have been maybe 4 to 5 feet more this direction, I think it probably killed us all.
We learned later that there were several pieces of ice found. One piece fell out in the road out in front of the house, and another piece landed back over the hill in a man's field. But we had no idea where it came from, but it was sure in a hurry to get here.
The only surviving fragment of the ice is now in the custody of Sergeant Butch Hottinger. He's making one final attempt to crack the case.
At this time, I'm taking that ice to a research laboratory to try and find out probably for this last time, where this ice might have came from.
Aircraft, however, have been ruled out as the culprit. "2,000 miles and 3 planes later, Sergeant Hottinger's destination is the National Center for Atmospheric Research, perched high in the Rocky Mountains, and the Sub-Zero Laboratory of Dr. Charles Knight.
Come in.
Hello.
Hello.
Dr. Knight?
Yes.
Sergeant Hottinger.
How do you do?
Rockingham County Sheriff's Department.
Oh, pleased to meet you.
With me a specimen from the Timberville ice fall.
Yes, yes. Well, let's see what it looks like.
Have you to analyze it there and see if you can help me on it.
How big was the piece that did fall?
The piece that did fall, I'd say it probably was, you know what the size of a basketball is? It's about the size of a basketball.
I see. That's too big for a hailstone anyway.
Pretty good size.
I see. This angled part is part of the fractured surface, I suppose.
Yes, sir, it is.
Well, the first step is to cut the ice with a saw so as to expose the internal structure. What we do then is to take a slightly warmed piece of glass so as to melt a thin layer of the ice and then put it down on the cold aluminum plate here until that layer of water freezes. The next step will be to saw parallel to the glass slide so as to make a thin uniform slice so you can see the internal structure. You can see, first off, that the crystals are very small. They're about a millimeter. Average, I'd say about a millimeter in diameter. And then that there's a trace of some layering in there. There's one rather distinct layer of larger crystals. By way of comparison, we could look at a section of a very large hailstone. This was a hailstone about this size.
A big one.
And it's composed of alternating layers of smaller and larger crystals.
Good bit of difference between them, isn't there?
There certainly is. I think we can conclude definitely that it was not a hailstone. In the case of a hailstone, we know the basic growth mechanism. This is a rather large hailstone that fell last summer, summer of 1979, in Fort Collins, a few miles to the north. Stones of this size fall at about 100 miles an hour. And a basketball-sized piece of ice like the Timberville fall probably fell at something like 125 or 150 miles an hour.
So what basically would be your final opinion of the Timberville icefall?
Basically, from the evidence of the ice itself, the conclusion has to be that we just don't know. Some mysterious pieces of ice have been analyzed, and people find tea leaves in them and things like that, and that can prove that it does come out of an airplane. In this case, you're left without any positive evidence of any specific origin.
Now, there may be something of real scientific importance behind this. Of course, we know that ice can fall from aircraft. It can form on the wings. It can come, regrettably, from faulty toilets. So, what's important are the reports of ice falls long before the era of aircraft. For example, in 1847, a block of ice 20 feet in circumference fell on Scotland.
It landed on Mr. Moffat's farm in Ayrshire. The Scotsman newspaper said, "It is a most fortunate circumstance that it did not fall on Mr. Moffat's house, or it would have crushed it." Near misses are still happening today. Even scientists aren't safe, as physicist Dr. Richard Griffiths discovered in Burton Road in Manchester in the spring of 1973.
Just in the road here by that manhole cover, an object appeared with a great crash. I went over and picked up this object and realized that it was ice. I thought to myself that since it was so much bigger than any meteorological lump of ice that I knew of, it was of scientific interest. But deeper than that, I realized that if it had hit me on the head, I would have been killed.
Next day, Dr. Griffiths hurried with the ice to his laboratory at Manchester University. There he sliced and scrutinized it. He noticed strange lines of bubbles.
The bubble lines were very, very regular indeed, and not meandering around all over the place, such as you observe in hailstones.
Next, he examined it under polarized light, where each crystal shows up as a different color.
It was nearly all composed of big crystals, 2 to 3 inches long, with no layer structure in the way that one has with a natural hailstone. So, whatever mechanism this ice lump grew by, at that stage I knew that it wasn't a natural hailstone.
Aircraft, too, were ruled out. There were none overhead at the time, and no icing was reported that day. When Dr. Griffiths analyzed the water which made up the ice, the mystery simply deepened. Although not a hailstone, it seemed to be made of something very like cloud water.
I'm puzzled. I was looking at this problem and trying to see, was there an obvious explanation? 2 first tries are aircraft or hailstone, and we seem to have eliminated both of those. I really don't know.
I think it very significant that some of these ice falls are accompanied by loud explosions, just like the re-entry bangs of our own returning spacecraft. Now, we know that iron meteorites fall on Earth, although it took science a long time to accept this. We also believe there's a great deal of ice out in the solar system, in the rings of Saturn, in the cores of comets. So perhaps some of these falls are due to literally cosmic ice. Yet there are other falls reported by apparently impeccable eyewitnesses, which I'm completely unable to give any rational explanation. Your guess is as good as mine.
On Sunday, March the 13th, 1977, Mr. Alfred Wilson Osborne, chess correspondent for the Bristol Evening Post, left the Westbury Park Methodist Church to walk home with his wife.
And all the corrections as well. Oh, lovely, thank you.
Their journey took them past a car showroom.
When we reached this point, there was a click, and I thought that I'd lost a button in my coat. Looking around, we found they were in the middle of a shower of hazelnuts coming from the sky. And they were dropping on the cars, falling in the gutter, and I should think there would be as many as we saw, about 350 of them.
We had no idea at all where all these hazelnuts were coming from. We picked up quite a few of them and took them home as souvenirs.
We cracked some of them open. They were quite fresh and sweet and nice.
The sky was blue and there was one small cloud there, but there was no aeroplanes or anything like that about for them to come down from there.
So we went home, still puzzling over this. And when we reached home, we were having a friend of ours to lunch, and he came along and said, the most extraordinary things happened to me. And I said, don't tell me, you've been covered with a shower of hazelnuts. He said, yes, how did you find out? And apparently he had the same experience in the same spot 2 or 3 minutes afterwards. How they came and where they came from, I have no idea, but why I thought that it might be a vortex that sucked them up. But I don't know where you suck up hazelnuts in March.
Further nutritious cascades have descended on South Mill Road in Southampton. The recipients, one wintry day, Mr. Roland Moody and his neighbours.
Well, I was in this conservatory, pricking out seeds, and I heard this whooshing sound, which was on the glass above me, and I didn't take a lot of notice of it, but about 3/4 of an hour afterwards, it had done it again, and I looked up and found the whole of the glass above me covered in, we found out afterwards, mustard and cress seed. This went on, it seemed to me, all day long, at intervals of half an hour, and altogether I would think 5 or 6 instances of it.
We happened to be in the dining room. First of all, we heard this terrific clatter. It was an awful noise, wasn't it?
Yes.
We rushed out and went down into the garden, and presently a load of broad bean seed came over, and we both ducked. Ducked down because they're fairly big, broad bean seed. And then you got a little bit annoyed about it, didn't you?
So I turned round to the wife and I said, well, this is bloody silly. I couldn't help it.
The following day, down come a shower of peas and maize, haricot beans. By then, of course, we were all getting rather excited about it. It was still snowing, it was still gusting, and we couldn't make head or tail of it.
I was on the telephone one day, which is situated near the front door, and my son came along and opened the front door for some reason, and a shower of broad beans came through. I should think dozens and dozens of them, and really quite startled me, because I gave a little cry, and my friend on the other end of the phone said to me, what's the matter? And I said, oh, I've just been hit by a lot of beans. So it was quite a giggle from her point of view. Anyway, she came round, and she was there when it happened again, and said that she wouldn't have believed it if she hadn't have seen it. And there were literally dozens of them littering the carpet. And this sort of went on, well, all day long, right up until 8 o'clock in the evening. And several visitors came to my door and were hit on the back of the head. I was hit on the head, and they really hurt. They stung. They came with such force.
And I suppose altogether we must have collected some 10 pound in weight of seeds. It was almost unbelievable. The beans grew, the peas grew, yes. Well, everything in fact grew, and I believe Mrs. Gale has already sent some up the Midlands, and they've made a very good crop.
Next week, UFOs.